Hi, I'm Anand. This video is a deep introduction to meon. It walks you through all the fundamental elements of meon in extremely detailed descriptions. So let's get started. We assume that you have seen some of the other videos. If you've not, you might find it a little hard to follow along, but you will still, I think, be able to understand most of what is being said. If you ever need help, you can always go and look at some of the more introductory videos. But this actually goes through every setting and every possibility that you have while creating your apps in Meon and configuring them and deploying them and writing content into them. So let's get started. The way you create apps. So apps are these containers which map to typical web applications that you're familiar with. And apps contain items which are units of configuration where you can configure them for saying who can read, write, edit, delete, and a few other things. We'll see them in full detail in this video. And then each item can have other child items under it, and also each item has a bunch of fields which describe the structure of the item, and fields are of different types. They're called field types, and we'll also look at each field type in this video and how each field type works and how to use it. All right, so we'll be creating a very absurd kind of application to more illustrate the different features of Meon than to really use it as a real world application anywhere. So let's actually start by creating a new app. So one of the ways to do that is to click on the actions menu and select new app. The other way is to go to the apps page by going to actions apps, or by from one of the action sections, one of the sections in this page about apps, and then click on the plus button on top. But here we'll just use actions new app. So let's call this kitchen sink, because it's going to really have every conceivable kind of field, and we're going to be playing around with the settings and so on. So a description is optional. We can give a description and it'll show up on the app page. We also, when an app is made clonable, the administrators will add a cloning instruction section describing how to clone the app, which you don't see here because I'm not signed in as an administrator. I'm showing you the experience that you'll have as a user. So you go to new app and you can create an app. Now, in the case of the new app, you have this link here which will take you to a page that shows you how to create a new app. So this is just a very simple walkthrough. It's definitely not elaborate enough to be able to do everything you want to do, but to create a blog with the basic settings, you can use that walkthrough to get a sense and get familiar if you've not done this at all, and if you find it like there are many things you can do in Meon in terms of creating apps, but that's sort of the most basic thing to create a blog kind of app. So we'll leave the description. We could leave the description empty, but what I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually get some content in here just to show you where it shows up. So excuse me, this is called lorem ipsum content. It's just used by designers to fill in some nonsense content just to show how things look. So this is our description, and we're going to save it as draft. Now, whenever you create an app, you can either save it as a draft or you can publish it. The saving as draft is only, the publish button is not even here right now because it doesn't mean anything to publish an app with just a name and a description. You need to actually add items and fields in it to make sense. So there should be at least one item with at least one field that the user can really do something with before they can publish it. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense to just create instances of those. So instances of the items. So we'll now save this as a draft, and this is the page which shows the app, and it says successfully created app kitchen sink, which you can close out here, or if you refresh the page, it will go away. And now you're in a page which allows you to do a bunch of things. Since this is your own, this is my own app, I can clone it and create another app. Now, this clone button will appear only to me for my own apps, or if an app has been marked as clonable by the administrators, then you will be able to clone those apps. But just because I'm seeing this clone button here doesn't mean that if you signed in and opened this app, you'll be able to clone it. So you wouldn't be able to clone an app unless it's been made clonable by that administrator. But you can always clone your own apps because you might want to make a bunch of variations of the same app or play around with it. So you're free to do that. But the highlighted option in your little toolbar here is the plus, which allows you to add an item, because that's kind of the natural thing to do next. You have an app and you want to add an item, and the plus basically lets you add an item. You could also edit the app, where you could go and change that name and description you just made, or you could delete the app. But let's now go and add an item. So when you create a new item, there are two choices, two paths you could take. So this is the form for creating a new item, and you could clone an item from some other existing item. So let's just look at that and do one of those. So let's say you want to clone a post into this app. So you just start typing post, and you'll see a bunch of different posts that are out there, or something related to a post. So you could go in here and say, oh, this is a forum, admin users, forum apps post. Maybe not exactly what I'm looking for, but here's a blog post. So maybe this is a good one to clone. So let me just clone that. So that's a very quick way for you to go and find something you want to clone, and then just say clone, and that item will just get cloned. It just gives you a confirmation, and once you confirm it, you have an item, you have a post in your kitchen sink app, which is just a clone of that. Now, it's always a good idea to look at the settings of what you've just cloned, because whether it be an app or an item or an app containing items and fields. So let's first look at what settings of the app are. Actually, no, let's look at the fields. So it has two fields, title and body, and it seems to look okay. The title is required and the body is empty, and you can always click on it and see other settings. We'll come to that in a minute, but let's now just look at the settings. So the settings say that only the app owner can create instances, any member can read instances, only the person who creates an instance can edit it himself. That's what this item instance creator means. And only the person who created an instance can delete it also. Stat readers is something about a feature which I have not really talked much about in the earlier videos, which is called statistics. We'll come to that in a bit, but basically this is about the statistics for this item as a whole. So let's say this item has some choice field, or it has a number field. Then there are some statistics that are interesting. So for example, if there's a number field like say score, and you could now look at all the scores, and you could go, there's a section called statistics which will appear under the item once there's enough content, and there, if it has a number field, which any number field for that matter, it'll actually tell you the minimum value, the maximum value, and so on. And similarly, if you have a choice field, so if you remember the issue tracker app that we talked about before, that had a choice field for status, and you want to go and see which or let's which of the issues are open versus which of them are fixed. So you can actually see a statistic there which will say open issues, and you click on that, it'll actually give you a number. It'll say there are about 20 open issues right now. You click on that and it'll take you to a page which has exactly the open issues. So it's a very powerful tool to navigate based on statistics of that app. So this setting here is something which allows you to say who can read the statistics. So for example, if there's a poll, the statistics will tell you if there's a question with 3 choices, and the statistics will tell you, how many people have picked each choice. But you don't want the person who's not yet taken the poll to get biased by looking at that. So you can specify something here as a setting called responder, which for the stat readers. And if you set the stat readers to be responders, it means that only someone who's already created an instance of that item can go look at the stats. So that's one option you have. Otherwise, you can say, any member can see it. Right now it's blank, which means only the app creator can see it. So remember that the stat readers is slightly different. That's why it doesn't have the word instance before it, because it's not about one instance. It's about the statistics of all the instances of this item. Now, sometimes when you're dealing with a child item, the statistics are grouped under the parent instance. So let's say you have a question answers app, and you have a question and it has a bunch of answers. Now the answer item stat readers would tell you the stats you see there will be, depending on where you're seeing it, it'll be the numbers related to the stats of the answers to a given question. So if you're in a given questions page, then the stats you see there will be based on that. So anyway, let's not go too far into that, but statistics is just about seeing a bunch of statistics. And just like you see fields and settings in any item page, a new tab will open up here called statistics when there is enough to show, when there's anything to show. There's the setting for supporting anonymity, which basically means this item, whether or not it allows people to post it anonymously, and that is something which we'll look at in detail later, but I think it's pretty simple. It's basically saying that if this item supports anonymity, then whenever you post a post here, an instance of the post, it'll ask you whether you want to post it anonymously. So that's really all it is. The setting called recursive is a very interesting feature. So imagine that you want to create a taxonomy or a hierarchy which has same kind of items at each level. So you want a bunch of items, one under the other, but you don't know how many are going to be there, and they're all pretty much identical. So for example, it could be like a library Dewey classification of books in libraries, or it could be a biological taxonomy, or it could be a way to categorize movies by genres, and there are genres which have subgenres and so on, or it could be a way to categorize subjects and subtopics and subsubjects, and and so on. So those kind of items would enable this recursive feature, saying here's how a subject looks structurally, these are the fields and so on. But when I make it recursive, it means that the moment I create an instance of a subject, a new child called subject can be created under that. So a new item will be created under the subject, also called subject, and it will allow you to create arbitrarily deep hierarchies of the subjects. So that's what recursive does. So the power of this is that as we'll see in the form in a minute, we'll basically, you can just check one box and you get this entire ability to have a huge complicated hierarchy of things. And remember that if you mark this item as recursive, if this item itself has child items, then each level will again create an item of the same name and the child items and the whole child item tree under it. So if, for example, you have a book review app which has a book subject or book genre or book category, then you can have a book category to be recursive, but the book category itself has a child item called book. So you can have a bunch of books under each category, and then you could have, when you create subcategories, then you could add books under them as well. So you could have books at different levels depending on where it makes more sense. So recursive is a very, very powerful feature. Instance creation, start time and end time. So sometimes, let's say you're creating a quiz app and you want the ability to specify that this quiz is open from this time to this time. So to do that, you can specify a start time and end time, and the quiz will only be open between those times. Reviewable is a feature which allows you to take any item and make it reviewable. So if you right now it's not, it says, when it says X, it means that it's not reviewable, it's not anonymous, doesn't support anonymity, it's not recursive. But reviewable is a feature which lets you take any item and say, I want people to be able to add reviews of this item under it. And depending on how you set it up, so it will basically allow a review page which allows you to review each and every field of the original item. So let's say you created a post and you want your editors to review your post before it goes out, then the editors can review the title, they can review the body. In this case, you have only two fields, but imagine a whole more complicated document which has several sections, then each of them could be reviewed and you could give an overall review as well. We talked briefly about grading. So there is this notion of grading which doesn't appear in the item, it appears in each field. So if there are fields which are graded, then the review also allows the reviewer to assign grades to those review items. So if you combine this with the graded fields, then you'll have that capability as well. And is review is really something which just tells you whether this item itself is a review that was created because its parent item was reviewable. So it doesn't let you set it anywhere, it just is something which tells you whether this is a review item or not. Alright, so that's a quick overview of the settings of an item, and you'll see the same settings everywhere when you create an item, when you edit an item, and we'll see how that works in just right now, but this just gives you an overview. There's a similar exercise we'll go through with the fields, and we'll look at each of the settings and say what they mean, and we'll see how to set them as well. So let's now go and edit this post and look at how those settings look. So whether you edit an item or you create an item, you'll have a very similar experience, except that when you're editing it, the fields will all be filled. Now you can go and look at, here there's not much. You can give the item a name and a description. Right now it's just filled with the name. But you can go into this advanced section, which is where a lot of what we saw there comes up. So in fact, some of these don't even show there, which they probably should. But so there's these different capabilities. So let's walk through these again. Some of these might be a recap of what we did, but we'll also see how to set them. So let's say we're talking about editing this post and we want to do something with it. So let's first look at sorting. So when you create instances of this post, so let's say you create, this is a thing where only you make posts and you want to make those posts to be ordered in a certain way when people see them, then you basically specify this to be positional, as in you're going to specify which position each of those posts will appear in, and those posts will be sorted by that order. You can also change that to say that you just always order it to be recent by default or oldest by default. So wherever the user sees a bunch of this particular items instances, this is the order that they'll be ordered by default. But you can always, in some of those views, you have the ability to go and change the order and see it in other orders as well. But by default, this is the order that will be presented. And so you might want to say that I want the recent first, recent one to be on top and sort of sorted by most recent first, or sort by the oldest one first and go like into more recent ones later, or sort by popularity. Now, popularity is an interesting feature. Apps, item instances, which is content, and topics and categories, I think even users, all of them have the notion of being the popularity, which allows you to sort. So primarily, you'll be using it with apps, items, when it comes to sorting them with based on popularity, and they are available to sort by popularity as well. And popularity is determined by how much of interaction is there. Like if if it's an app, how much of content has been created under it, how many people have upvoted the content, how many of them are following the app, and so on. Similar thing for content as well. So any piece of content, you can look at there's a notion of sorting it by popularity. So in this case, we're saying what is the order by which the content will be sorted by popularity. So you can also say that it should always be most popular ones first. Now, next section, so the first thing we talked about is sorting. The next section of the advanced settings on an item is policy. And policy basically refers to all the security access we talked about, who can read, who can write, how many instances can a user create, and so on. So the first thing we have here, you should kind of look at this statement here. It's pretty important to know that system administrators are always authorized to do anything for management and maintenance purposes. The owner of the app is also authorized within the app, so they can go around and do whatever they want because they own the app and they have to manage the content within the app. But apart from that, we're looking at who else is allowed. That's really what you're specifying here. So the maximum instances per user is basically saying how many instances of this item can each user create. Now, this, if you leave it blank, then that means any user can create any number of instances. It doesn't change anything. But if you set a number, say if you say 1, then that means each user can only create one instance. Now, if this item, in this case, the item is what we call a base item because it's directly under the app. But there could also be items under items, right? So if you're a base item, then it means whatever you put here is the maximum number of instances the user can actually create. If it's a child item of another, so let's say you were in a question answers app and there was a question item and under that there was an answer and you were kind of setting the fields or the policy of the answer item, then you can say, if you say maximum instances per user is 1, that means for any given question the number of instances that the user can create is 1. Okay, so this is a very important distinction to know about, because if you say a user can create one instance, then it doesn't mean that they can create only one instance for all questions in the answers if you were looking at an answer item. So you should be very careful how you use this field. But the next one is really not a saved setting, but it's a setting for convenience on this page. So oftentimes you want to say in all these things, who can create, who can read, and so on, that you want to use some groups. So a group is nothing but a named collection of users on Meon that you create and say these people belong to this group for me. So if you create a group called family, then you would add your family members who are on Meon into it. If you created a group called friends, you could add your friends. If you create a group called co-workers, then you could add your co-workers and so on. So that is what a group is. Sometimes you'll hear this term user group, which also refers to the same group concept. So when you specify these groups, now it's possible that you're creating an item and for the first time, you've not created any groups, you don't have any groups at all, and you want to create the groups as and when you specify them here. So let's say I want this post to be something that only my family can read. So I could go in here under the instance readers, I could say family, and I could say I want that any group that's not already there to be created automatically. So that's what this does. So if I check this box, it will create it. Otherwise, it will give an error if that group does not already exist. So the purpose of this feature is, of this create groups if needed, is to say that if you already had a group of that name, then you may not want to have it created again, right? So you want to use that same group. But if there is no group of that name, and if you thought that you had a group of that name, you don't want things to get messed up. So anyway, I don't want to go too much into the detail, but the point is, do you want that whenever you specify a group, if that group doesn't exist by that exact same name, then it should get created. So if that's the case, you check this box. If you don't want it to get created, you don't check this box. Now, then we'll move on to each aspect of policy. The first thing is, who can create instances of this item? So can any signed in user of Meon create instances of this item? Then you should check this and say members. So they're called members. Members are the people who are signed into Meon. So any member who have an account on Meon, and when they're signed in, they can create stuff. So if you say members, then once you create this app and publish it, any member of Meon can come in, and if he sees the page of this item or the app, they'll have an option to create a new post of this post that you're editing right now. So if you don't want that, you leave it empty, then it means that right now if you don't fill in, so there are three things under every one of these policies, each one of these policies. So you have members, you have users, and you have groups. So if you leave all these blank, that means the only person who can create anything is the owner of the app. So if I created this app, so only I can create instances. Right now it's set like that, but I can change it to add a members, which means all members can do it, can create instances, or I can specify explicit users by their name. So I can say John, Jane, Jack as an example there, and they're all allowed. Now, if any user with that name in Meon will be allowed to do that operation. So they're allowed in this app to create instances. You not use the users as much as you might use groups. So you might say, hey, this is a family blog, and this is a post in a family blog, and I want this post to be created by anybody in my family can post into this app. So I've created this app, so all my family members can post into it. So I would create a group called family, and if I checked create groups if needed, then it would automatically create those groups. So if all I have to do here is enter the name of a group that I want, or I could even say multiple groups, family, friends. So then both family and friends would get created, and they would get the privileges to create instances here. Now, in this case, I might say, oh, I don't want all my family members to create. So I've just removed that for now. But I want only, so right now, if you look at the next section, which is who can read instances of this. So there you see, again, you have a couple of new settings here, but it's right now, the only thing that is checked is members, which means any member of Meon can really read this. Now, let's look at the other two settings. You have something called this item instance creator, which means whoever created an instance can read it, apart from, of course, the app owner and the administrators if needed. But the only additional person who can create read instances is whoever created the instance himself or herself. There's no ability for anyone else to read it. Then you would just check this and uncheck the members. All right, but right now we had members checked like that, and that means any member can read instances. Now there's another setting here called public, and what that means is it's kind of saying, even if you share this link to someone else of a post which was created with this item, then they should be able to read that even if they don't sign into Meon. So you could set that, and others could read that content directly. So that's also a possibility. But that's something you do if you go onto your social sites and share thing, and you think that many of them may not be on Meon, and you want them to read your content, then that's one way to do it. So you can make it public as well. So these are what we call the standard settings for instance readers. Now remember that we are looking at what we call a base item, which is an item right under an app. There are a few additional settings which come in when you're dealing with a child item, which has parent items. Okay, we'll look at that as well. So for now, we will move on. And we've said, again, we can add specific users or specific groups to the instance readers. Similarly, editors is almost identical to instance readers, except we don't allow non-signed in people to edit anything in meon. So that's why you don't see the public option here, but you can still say only this item instance creator or these members or these specific users or these specific groups. Same thing with instance deleters. Editors and deleters is almost identical. If you don't check anything in these, then only the app owner will be allowed to delete. So for example, if I remove this, then only the app owner would be allowed to delete instances of this. So even if you created an instance, since I'm the app owner, only I'm allowed to delete it. So all these are specified by the app owner. And by the way, I should probably mention this. I don't think I mentioned it before. When you're creating an app, you're the app owner, you're the one who defines, you're the only one allowed to define what the item looks like and what the fields look like. No one else can come in and change that except the system administrators if you need help and so on, and in some special circumstances. But in general, the other people can't come in and start editing your app. The only way they can do anything is to clone the app, and then now they become the app owner of that cloned app, and then they can make changes there. All right, so that is about instance deleters. And again, you can specify users and groups. We already talked briefly about stat readers. We said there's a new setting there, which means responder, which means anyone who has created an instance can then read the stats. Or you can again choose members or public or specific users or groups. All right, so those are what we call the policy settings. And this is the heart of how you configure your app. And you can make your app as private or as expansive as you want. It's really your own choice. So you can say only I can read and write content in this. That's fine too. Or you can say only I can write stuff and others can read. Specific people, specific groups, or all members, or only people who created the instance. I mean, this really, you have all the possibilities you can think of within these settings. And once you've seen this video, I think you can go off and create some amazing configurations for your apps. All right, in terms of policy. So moving on, the next thing is anonymity. We already talked about that. Do you want this item to support anonymous instances? If you say supports anonymity, then at the end of every post form where you're creating a new post or edit form, you can check, there'll be a box saying anonymous. If you check that, then it will be posted anonymously and no one can see who posted that. So of course the meon administrators can see that, and that's for security purposes and so on, but no one else can actually see it. We talked about recursion as well. So if you want the item to be recursive, like the biology taxonomy or the subjects or the genres, movie genres, or library book classification, so you just have to check this box, and you will, whenever you create a post. So one thing to be aware of in this recursion and review, both of them have this characteristic of automatically creating a child item, right? So in recursion, it creates the same thing. In review, it creates a review item. But in both cases, the item gets created only after you created an instance. Because otherwise, it doesn't really make sense to say it's recursive, and how deep do you go in creating items. So we only create a recursive item once an instance is created. And things can go really crazy if you start changing the structure of your item after you've made, there are recursive copies of it, because those copies will reflect the structure of your app and the parent item at the time of creating the first recursive item, which is when you create the first instance of this thing, of this item. So let's say you mark this to be recursive and you went ahead and saved everything, and then you created a post. When you create your first post, there'll be a new post option under that post, and a new post item will get created under it with the exact same structure, and it'll also be recursive. So that's how it works. Now, now that post will have exactly the same fields and everything as this. Now, if you went in later and came to this post and added a field or changed something, then that new post that was created or any subsequent posts that were created under it will not be aware of that change. So you can find a little weirdness in this case. There's even more weirdness when we come to the review. So the lesson there is, when you create recursive items, you try as best as you can not to change the item after recursive, or more especially the review items than recursive. Do not change the structure of the item without being really aware of what you're doing. So do not change the structure of your item if it's recursive and already there are recursive items that have been created under it. Now, the next thing we talked about is the time window, and this will allow the creation before and after. And this is really neat, because when you actually go in to create an instance, it will have a countdown timer on top and tell you how much time is left for you to finish this. So if you have an end time, for instance. So if you leave them blank, there's really no start time or end time, but you can just select one of these and set it. So you can say hey, only at this time and date, or you can same thing you can do with the end time. You could do either of them, you can do both of them, and depending on what you said, that's the only time in which instances will be available, which means you won't get like a new post link when you're not within that time frame. Outside of that time frame, it's not possible to create instances. All right, so then you have the review section where you can say, I want to make this item reviewable, which means that when you create a post, post review, it will be called an item called post review will be, or review of post. I don't remember exactly the words, but it will something which reflects the review of this post will get created automatically under it, and it will look like, I'll show you once we do that. It will look like the same post item with its fields. So when you create an instance of the post and you below it you say I want to create a new review for this instance, then it will show you the values of the parent post in each field, and it will give a box for you to give feedback on each of those. And you can, and then there's an overall feedback summary on top. So you can have a review summary at the top, and then you have feedback on each thing. And if you have supported grading in certain fields, then those fields will also have a grade section where you have to enter a grade. You can enter a grade for that particular field. So if it's like a test that a teacher is evaluating and you've set grading for some of those, then the reviewer can enter a grade. Okay, so that's what this reviewable does. Now, there's a further feature within the review feature which allows you to do anonymous peer reviews. So, anonymous peer reviews are reviews which basically what it says is, hey, so this could be, for example, a test that is administered to a large number of people, and they are all, now there's too many for the examiner or the teacher or lecturer to actually go and evaluate by themselves. So what they do is they allow each of the other students to review each other's anonymously. So neither will the reviewer know who wrote this particular set of answers. So the actual test attempt will be anonymous to the reviewer, nor will the person who gets the review feedback know who wrote the review. So that's what anonymous peer reviews does. It works both ways. It allows users to create reviews that they won't know who wrote the actual questionnaire and that particular attempt, and the attempter won't know who reviewed that thing. So it'll be like all traces of the name and stuff will be removed from those pages. So that's what checking this gets you. So if you want to create a quiz which you want peers to review, it's not auto graded, it's like manually graded, and you want the peers to review it, then you can do that as well. And by the way, so just speaking of quizzes, we have talked in one of the past videos about an auto-graded quiz, and we've also talked about a manually graded test. Now, there's also a possibility to mix the two. So you could have some questions which are objective and they're automatically graded, and then there are some questions which are to be manually evaluated by the teacher, so or the evaluator or the anonymous peer in this case, if you check this. So if something is reviewable and you check anonymous peer reviews as well, then the peers will be able to review it anonymously. Now, this is, if you just take a step back and look at the settings over here, you'll realize that the power of this set of configurations is that with just one checkbox, you're able to make miraculous things happen. You can enable anonymity with just one checkbox. You can make this entire thing recursive. You have like the ability to make it reviewable. You can make it anonymous peer review. This is the power of Meon. I mean, Meon has this ability to just give you one checkbox, which enables a very, very complicated set of features with no more, work on your part. You just say, I want it to be reviewable, and that's it. You're going to get all of those things. If you say you want to have anonymous peer reviews, you're going to get all of those things. So that's really the power of Meon. So let's move on. So we've now looked at an item and all its settings in pretty good detail. Now let's go back to the items. We've not edited this, so it'll just cancel out if you click somewhere else. So I'm going to click on this post, and let's now look at the fields in a similar breath, okay, in the similar sense. So let's look at each of these fields, and we'll look at their settings, and then we'll look at how to edit them. So first of all, in here you have the ability to clone any field, and a copy of that will be made with a slightly different name. It will suffix a number or something, and you can then go and modify it. So if you wanted another string field under this called author, then you could just clone this and then change the name there to author of the new field, and you'd be good to go. So that's one of the features, and you could choose whether it's required or not. You could make all the changes. So we'll come to that. But let's look at a typical field. Now, the thing about fields is they're a little more, uh, they're a little different. So they have slightly different structures depending on the field type that you pick. And we'll come to that. Okay, so this is just an overview of what the field was. Uh, Before we go into the fields, I would actually like to go to talk about a child item and its settings quickly, because we have the item settings fresh in our mind. Let's actually finish up with the child item. So let's say I create a child item under this post. Now it's all going to look, it's just an example for the sake of illustration. It has nothing to do with the real world. But let's say we create a child called uh, editorial or whatever, editorial comments, right? Now let's look at the advanced settings. Now the whole purpose of this, we're not even going to create this, we're just going to see the settings. So the sorting and all that is the same. The policy. So now when you go down to the policy and look at the instance creators, you see this new thing called parent chain item instance creators. So what does that mean? Now, whenever you're in a child item, you're going to be able to create instances of this only in the context of one of the parents instances, right? So only under the post instances can you create an editorial comments instance. So in that case, you can also say that only someone who's created one of the parent or grandparent or great grandparent instance of this instance of this item can create new instances. That's what this checkbox means. So right now, if the post was something which only the app owner could create, I think that's what the setting was there, then the parent chain item instance creators means that only the app owner will be able to create instances of this as well. And you have the other settings as usual. So this is the one new setting I wanted to show you. So just like we had this item instance creator, which we have for everything except instance creators. That's true whether it's a base item or a child item. The This item instance creator makes no sense for instance creators, because it's only a person who's already created the instance who has that privilege, and if you're not yet created the instance, what does that mean? So that's why you don't see it here, but it makes sense under all the other settings. So instance readers, editors, deleters, all of them have a this item instance creator option. The only the and the parent chain item instance creators is available across all these as well, including the instance creators. So which means if I went in and created a post instance, then I will get a button with this current setting to create a new child instance of this type, the editorial comments item. All right, so that's the main thing I wanted to show. I don't think there's anything else which changes. Yeah, so that's about it. So we'll cancel out. That was just a quick, so that's about the only change you see between a parent item and a child item as far as this goes. And once you've created, say, a recursive item or a reviewable item, and child items have been created due to recursion or as reviews, then you will find, so the main distinction, by the way, between a recursive item and a review is that recursive keeps going. So if you create a post and you made the post item here to be recursive, and you created a post instance, then under that you'll be able to create a new post. Let's say you create a new child post, which is under this post instance you created here. Now that will again show you on that page, you can create a grandchild post. You can create a post under that and under that and under that. The review is just one level deep. So if you make it reviewable, there'll be a post review which will be just right under this. So that's the main difference between the two. And the review, of course, shows you a lot about what the parent instance looks like and allows you to give feedback on each thing. So that's the post, that's the item. So now going back to the fields. And the best way to study fields, here we have two fields and you can see some settings, and you can of course click on these. I was just mentioning to you a minute ago that the settings you see for each field are dependent on which type of field it is. So for this purpose of this exercise, I think the best way to do this, we're back at the item page, is to click on new field and start looking at the different types of fields. Okay, so there are several of them, so we'll kind of walk through them one by one and see what each of them does and what's different between all of them. So each field, so when you click on new field, you get this drop down which gives you a palette of different types of fields that you can add to this item. All right, so I'm sorry, I think I clicked that by mistake. So click on new field, you have a counter, string, text, choice, multi-choice, etc. So the bunch of them, we'll walk through each of these. We'll first quickly glance through what each of them is. A counter automatically generates a unique number per instance. So it's like an ID in an issue tracker where you want to have a bug ID which is unique, or you want to have blog posts which are numbered as they get created. But remember that the counter is only effective as long as you don't, I mean, it'll always generate a unique ID for sure, but if you went and deleted something in the middle, then you might just see holes in the list. So if you had 10 blog posts from 1 to 10, and you went and deleted blog post 4, 5, and 6, then you'd just see 1, 2, 3, and then you'd see 7, 8, 9, 10. So wherever you see a list of posts. So that's something to be aware of. If that's okay with you, it's okay. Otherwise, you can always, create an integer field and manually enter the ID you want to enter and make sure you manage them if something changes. So that's about the counter. The string field is a string, and you just have, it's usually used for a single short string. And as you saw before, it doesn't allow you to edit. There's not much of formatting, editing capability that you have with the next field, which is the text, which is meant for multi-line text with formatting, with image links, code, math, and inserting a meon link itself into the body of your text, and so on. A choice field allows you to present a set of choices from which the whoever is entering the thing will pick one. So that's where you see those radio buttons, those round buttons of which one has to be picked out of a bunch. And a multi-choice is again a set of choices, but each of them is a checkbox now, and so you can pick none of them, or you can pick one of them, or you can pick all of them, pick any number of them. So that's called a multi-choice. A boolean is presented as a checkbox. So it's just true or false, and that's it. So you can have, whenever you want to present just a true or false kind of option to your users, you can use a boolean field there. And if you want to put in a number which can be positive, negative, or zero, you can use the integer field. If you want to create a decimal number which can again be positive, negative, or zero, then use a float field. If you want an expression that gets calculated based on other fields in here, and we look at how we use each of these, so don't despair. I mean, I'm not going to just gloss over this, because each of these has a bit of, especially the expression needs a bit of explanation. So this can be used to calculate a formula to compute the value of that, so based on other fields within the same item. So if you have an item with 5 fields, if you had a price field which is a say float, and you had a quantity field which is an integer, then you could create an expression field which is amount, which is price into quantity, right? So that way you could how you set that and all that we'll look at in a minute when we look at the expression field. And then we have these 3 date and time based ones. So you can have a date time, which is a date and a specific time, and just a date or just a time. And then finally we have these 2 reference fields. An item ref is just a reference to an item from as far as the field is concerned, which basically means, say, if I have an item called so what's a good example? Let's say we have an exercises app, a workout journal, in which we have workouts and we have exercises. Then the workout, let's say under the workout we have a set, and in the set you are actually going to log an exercise and say this exercise is what I did, and I did 5 sets of it, and the first set had so much weight and so much whatever. So all that can be specified fine, but if you want to each time, you don't want to keep repeating the name of the exercise and the details of the exercise, the video, the pictures, whatever else you want. So you can create these exercises in some other item elsewhere, and you can reference that item from here in the field. And then when you have to fill the value in the form, you can pick any instance of that item. So let's say you referenced an exercise item from within your set. Then when you create an actual set, from the set item you reference the exercise item using an item ref field here. But if you wanted to calculate the when you fill the set item instance, you would, for that field, you would be asked to specify an actual item instance to reference. So you pick a specific exercise and say this is the exercise I'm talking about. Group ref is very similar, except that the field references a group, a user group, and say, like, my family group. Or let's take the example of the issue tracker, where you say I have an assigned to field, which is a group ref field which references my team group. And when you actually fill out the form for the instance, then in that assigned to field, you pick a user who'd be a member of that group. Okay, so these are the different field types available now. We might add a few in the future, but I think these actually are a pretty powerful set of field types for the kind of apps that you can build here. One thing to note about the string field is that it has uh, some kind of smarts when it comes to deciphering what the string means. So if you put a link to an image, for example, then it will automatically render a preview of the image. If you put a link to a feed like an RSS or Atom feed, it will render the first few entries of the feed, and it'll keep updating it over time and so on. And if you render a video link like a YouTube link, then it would render a YouTube URL. And it actually supports a whole bunch of formats. So if you have a Wikipedia link or a Pinterest link, all of those links will be automatically parsed, and it will figure out and show what it needs to show. So it will show the actual contents of that particular thing nicely presented, so you can, and then there'll always be a way to click and go to that page. So it'll be like a preview of that thing. So that's one thing you should be aware of in the string. So you can just create a string field called video link, and when you enter an actual video URL there, then when you go to the page and see it, you'll actually see an embedded URL, the embedded video for that link. All right, so these are the different field types that you have, and we'll walk through. So let's see the depending on the field type, the choices you have to specify are different. So let's quickly look at the forms for each of these. So let's look at the counter field. So we can give it a name, give it some more details about the name. You can decide whether you want to show the name details in the instance page or not. These are probably not very applicable to the counter, but sometimes it comes in handy when you want to put something on top of the page under the counter. The counter is usually used at the top of a page, just as an ID for the whole page or whatever the content is. So, and then you can give a description, and that's it. There's no other advanced settings. So, and then it'll just create the counter. So now let's go look at the next field type. I just cancelled out. I'm not going to create any fields. I'm just going to show you each of these. So let's say you create a string field, you give it a name, you give more name details, you give it some description, and you make it required or not. You can say whether the field has to be entered when you fill out the form for this instance. You can specify a default value, which means that value will be filled in whenever you create a new instance. Of course, if you edit it and save it, then it's going to change. But initially, when you create a new instance of this item in which this field belongs, then a default value will be set. Since it's a string, it has two additional things here called minimum length and maximum length. So you can always restrict your string to be between these two lengths. You can say 3 and 5, and that's it. So it will ensure that the string will not be less than 3 characters or not more than 5 characters. And then you have an advanced section which you open up, and you can also enter a regular expression pattern to validate the string. I don't expect most people to use this. It's a little advanced. It's if you're a developer and you're familiar with regular expressions, you'll probably use that. Then you can also specify whether this field should be hidden in the schema. So whenever someone sees the schema, should they see the field or not? And the same thing applies to when they clone it. So when they clone the app, then the item, whether these fields should get cloned or not is determined by this. So those are a couple of things to be aware of. When you set this, it means that when someone clones this app, that field won't go through. So we saw the example of this in one of the earlier videos. When you do a quiz and you have a question there, and that question is something which is secret till the actual test is out, we don't want people to be able to see that beforehand. So neither can you clone it, nor can you see the field by seeing the schema of the questionnaire. And then you can also say, in some cases, like when you saw we saw this app called PVFV calculator, which allows you to calculate compound interest, and that app, the compound interest calculation is one where 3 of them are set and 1 is empty. So sometimes we have these intermediate values which we don't want to show again because it clutters up the view. We just want it for the sake of being able to calculate something. Then we can say that the instance should be hidden. So if we do that, then in the instance page, that particular field won't show at all. And that's fine, because you might only want to show the final computed results if you're using a lot of expressions and so on. Should the field be graded? So when you say supports grading, it means that you're going to specify a grade and optionally specify an answer. If you don't even specify an answer, it means that whenever this grade is specified, if the item is a review item, a reviewable item, then automatically the teacher who reviews this will be able to specify the actual grade for that instance. Okay, we talked about reviewable items. So this grading is closely tied with the review feature when it is not automatic. So if it's an automatically graded one, what you do is you check this, you'd give it a grade, and you'd say what is the answer, right? So if you specified all these three things, then it's going to automatically grade. There's no review needed, there's nothing involved. But if you check this and you give a grade and you don't specify an answer, then the reviewable, if this field were part of a reviewable item, then the review form, when it comes up, it will actually allow you to enter a grade for this field. It will allow whoever is reviewing it to enter a grade for this field. Okay, so that might seem like a mouthful. You can go back and watch this section, but that's really all it is. So you can check. You have to check support grading for grading or answer to be looked at. Otherwise, they might be ignored, or you might get an error. I'm not sure which happens right now. But you can say, if once you say support grading, you generally give a grade, and you could give an answer, in which case it means that you want it to be automatically graded. So whenever someone publishes an instance, you'll automatically get a grade based on what answer you specified. And what it's doing is it's comparing this answer with the actual value of the field instance. When you actually create an instance, the value is being compared with the answer. All right. So moving on to the next one, we looked at, sorry, we're looking at the new fields. So we looked at string. So this is for a string field. We have seen all the different options it has. Now others will start getting a little more familiar. So let's look at the text field. Again, it has the same familiar name, name details, required, default. And in the advanced section, it has support grading, and it doesn't have the notion of the score, so the grade and the actual grade that you want to enter. So, but it doesn't have a notion of an answer, because the text field inserts a whole bunch of other HTML and stuff. So being able to precisely specify an answer is not possible with the text field. So you would never use a text field to be auto graded. You could use a text field for the purpose of writing something in the middle, but if you want the field itself to be auto graded, you would use one of the other types, right? But you can always support grading, and you could have a text field for, say, an essay type answer, and you could have a question here which says describe the US Constitution or whatever, or the history of or something like that, a long kind of answer question. And you could expect you could say supports grading and say that the maximum score is 10, and then whoever reviews this, again the item would need to be reviewable, and then someone comes and reviews it, they can grade it and say, oh, I give you 5 marks out of 10 or 10 out of 10 or whatever, right? So that's that. And by the way, the text field gives you exactly the same experience when you are it looks like you have the same editor. You've seen that in the body of the post, in a blog, and so on. So this has several interesting features. So why not talk about it right now? Actually, I'll show it to you in a slightly different context, but let's cancel out of here, and let's publish this. And now I can create a new post. And so let's look at, so this is what the new post looks like. We haven't changed anything from what we cloned, so it still looks pretty much as it was. And this editor is pretty interesting. It has several buttons which are important to know, because this is what you get when you chose body to be a text field. And you can do, like, this one has paste, and paste is plain text, paste from Word, and you have the ability to do spell checking on your content. You can insert links. You can also specify, whether it should open up in a new tab or new window and so on. And you can also, I don't know what exactly this one, you can insert an anchor. But here's the interesting one. You can insert a link to an image, right? So, and it'll automatically, and you can also specify its width, height, and so on. So you can actually insert an image of a specific characteristic. You can insert code. We've sort of seen this before, but you can do that. You can insert mathematical formulas using something called MathJax and text. And here's the documentation. So when you click on that math, the summation symbol there, you get the ability to enter math. You can enter a table here. You can insert a table. You can specify how many columns, rows, and so on. You can insert a horizontal line. You can insert special characters. You can insert a YouTube video. then either put the embed code, or you can simply paste the YouTube video URL here, and you can also say make responsive, which means it will just fit it to the size of the window. So you can remove all the other, it'll ignore all the width, height and everything. It'll just fit to the width. That's what I do usually when I paste YouTube videos. And here's something I inserted into this editor, which is the ability to find a meon link and insert it. So let's say, I'm looking for post, and boom, there's all these different posts there, and I can, insert. So it'll show a few. It's not going to show. So you have to get very specific if you want more than that. But let's say, you look at try, and you'll get, so here you get some of these, right? So it shows only a few because we have a lot of stuff on meon, and you don't want to see all of them right here. But to insert a link, this is just a convenience tool, which once you pick something which you like, so, let's say I picked this one, right? And I want to insert it. When I say insert link, it's going to actually insert the link here with that text, all filled out for you. So that's a useful thing to have. You can also edit this box in full screen mode. So you just click on that, and now it's in full screen mode. Then you can always go back by clicking on the same thing. This will show you the HTML source, which I think most of you shouldn't care about. You can format it with bold and so on. You can also pick a bunch of styles. You can pick a bunch of formatting, and you can also set like lists and so on, and you can indent and so on. All right, quote as well. So this is what a text field does for you. This is what a string field does for you. And this topics always comes by default. And so depending on which field type you pick, you get different kinds of experiences. All right, so let's go back and continue with the different field types. So we saw the string, the text. The choice is similarly interesting. So you could create a choice field. You would specify all this, standard stuff. But then the most interesting thing here is the choices. So when you come to the choices, you can have a comma separated value. So let's say I want to give choices, 1, 2, 3, or I can even make it like full strings. The main thing is that the comma is what separates them. So if you have commas in your text, then bad luck. So you just don't use them, right? I suppose there's ways to escape that, but we'll not do that. But for now, let's say, it could say anything, open, fixed, closed. So this is sort of how you do it for an issue type field. And once you set the choices, you can specify a default, which means that's what will be checked initially. And in this case, you have to pick one of the available choices. You can't pick some other string here, you'll get an error. All right. And when you open up the advanced, now you notice that since this is a choice field, it has a few more options. So it has this, we already talked about the hide field and schema, hide field instance, grading and all that, which is very similar. The two new fields you see here are, two new options are track changes and shuffle. So track changes, basically, if you check this box, what happens is whenever someone changes the choices between these, automatically a dialog will pop up asking them to add a comment saying, just logging why they changed it. And then that comment will be shown in the comments under that instance. So when you're in an instance and you change one of these values, then automatically a dialog pops up. It asks you for comments. You can say something, or I think you can even leave it empty, but the comments will show that that change happened on this date by this user, and it will also, if he added any comment, then that comment will show up there. This field is called shuffle. Now that's very useful for, say, an issue tracker where you want to know who made those changes, who made it, who closed this bug, and I don't know who did it because there's no way to track it, and that's how you get track. If you just enable track changes, it'll work. So then the next one is about when you're showing these choices to the user, do you want to shuffle them? So oftentimes when you're making a quiz with multiple choices, you don't want people to just say, hey, it's the third one, right, and share the answer. So you could shuffle them in such a way that they can, each one will get them in different orders, but the answer will eventually be correctly evaluated. So, and then you have these things which you've already talked about. So we'll move on. A multi-choice is almost identical to this. So we'll look at it real quick. The only difference is that here you have the same multi-choices. So you put a bunch of choices. The default can have multiple choices. So let's say you put choices here as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and here you just put like 2 and 3. Then 2 and 3 will be checked by default, and these will be the 5 presented choices. And again, in the advanced here, you don't see track changes. You don't track changes on this one. It's only on the choice field that you track changes. and possibly I think on the Boolean, I'm not sure. But here you don't track. And here you have shuffle, hide field in schema, and the same stuff which you had. So you could still shuffle the choices when showing it to the user, and everything else would work the same. All right, the next field type is Boolean, and this one allows you to give it a name, and the default is if you check this, it will be checked. If it's not checked, then it will be unchecked by default. And it has, yeah, it doesn't have track changes, so it doesn't have any of the other ones. It's, you know, same standard advanced settings that we already talked about. Then the next one is integer. Now the integer by default is anything negative, positive, or, and it's pretty arbitrarily long, and you know, you can use any size of integer here, but you give it all the usual stuff. And here you'll notice that it has a default, of course, as usual, where you can enter any integer value. The min value and max value here. So if you noticed, if you remember, in the string you had a minimum length and maximum length. Here you have minimum value and a maximum value because it's an integer, and that's more likely to be useful in the case of an integer. And again, you have the same advanced options. So let's go back. Let's look at the float field type. And the float is very similar. I don't think it has anything different from the integer. Yep, it's almost identical except that it supports float values. Now, one thing I should mention, going back to the integer, is that you can constrain it to be only positive numbers by using this min value and max value. So for example, if you want only positive numbers, and say min value is 1 and leave max value as blank, then it'll ensure that it's only positive values. If you want it to be, say, 0 and above, then just set the minimum value to 0 and leave this as blank, or you can specify any arbitrary range. So that's how you could do, you know, just if you wanted only like positive numbers, for instance. Okay, so the next one is, we looked at Boolean, integer, float, and now expression. We'll leave that for a second. We'll come back to it because it's got a little bit more explanation needed. But date time allows me to specify, you know, again, it's like there's a default, which if you click again, immediately it picks up the, you can pick a date and a time. And one thing to mention about the datetime fields is that I think internally they're all stored as UTC time, but depending on the application context, you can choose to interpret them differently. So if it doesn't really matter what the actual time is, then you can use them as, you know, even as local time. You can always enter your local time and it doesn't really matter. But if there are cases where you're using it with some kind of a countdown or a time window and so on, then you might need to be careful. So just something to be aware of. But in general, just know that it's UTC time and not local time. It doesn't, I mean, what is stored inside internally is treated as UTC time, or GMT as you would call it. So again, it has a minimum value and a maximum value. You can pick that, you know, it should always be between this date range. And then the advanced has nothing else except the standard stuff. So it's very, very similar when it comes to date and time fields. We just saw the date time, but date is almost the same except that what pops up when you pick something is just a date in this case. All right, so otherwise it's identical to the date field. Same thing with time. When you pick a time field, you'll see that it's identical to the date time or date field, except that when you pick a value, what you'll get both here and in the form is just a time. All right, so that's that. We already talked about item ref and group ref. Let's look at it briefly. So you give it a name, you do the other stuff. There's no advanced settings here because it's a very specific kind of field. You can reference an existing item. So let's say exercise, which was the example. So here we have the admin's exercise item. So be careful which one you pick if there are multiple, because you don't want to pick the wrong one. And so if you're intending to pick an item within the same app or within your apps, then make sure that the user here is your name. And if it's not, then you might land up picking up something else, and that might not have the exercise you're looking for example. All right, so this is the item ref, and the group ref is somewhat similar, where you have to pick the name of a group that you have. I don't have any groups, so it's not going to ever find anything. I don't have any groups at this point, so it's not going to really work. But Once I have some groups created, I can start referencing them and using that to pick a user from that. So in this particular case, that's not going to show up anything useful. All right, so we've covered everything except this expression field. So we'll sort of save the best for last. So let's look at how this expression can be built. So we could say something. So we'll give it a name and all that. What the most interesting thing is here. So what we do here is, so now whenever we add this an expression field, and you can add any number of them to a given item, what it allows you to do is to reference fields, other fields within the same item of certain types, and how you reference it will come to. But let's say you're creating an amount field, and let's say you already had a price and a quantity field in the same item, and you're looking at an order item. Let's say, I mean, we're not there, but again, we have to just imagine that we're there, that we are in an order item which already has a price which is a float and a quantity which is an integer, and now we want to create an amount. So we'd call this amount, and here we would just use this formula which I have in this example. So I would just say price into quantity. But look at the syntax very carefully. So if the other fields were called price, then I would put a colon, so the colon here, then I would type price, and I'd put another colon immediately after. Okay, and then I would use the operator for multiplication, and again I put a colon, and I write quantity, which is the name of the other field, and that's it. So this is how you define the formula. Now, what are the different things you can do here? You can use pretty much any mathematical, logical expression here. You can manipulate strings. One nifty tool is to just put a string in here. So if you just put a string within quotes like that, then it'll actually show up as a string always. So it's almost like having a constant string that you want to put in there. So this works. So it'll just show hello without the quotes whenever you see its value elsewhere. But if you put in something which it doesn't understand, so if I just put in, something like say age, and there's no field called age in the system, I will get an error when I try to compute this, the value of this field at runtime. And so you have to be very careful when you use the expression field, and there's a whole bunch of possibilities as to what you can do. I had a bit of documentation somewhere which I'll pull up in a minute, but it uses a library called Dentaku, and that's the page you probably want to. So, I mean, for those of you who are a little more technically comfortable looking at more details, so there's the site, and I'll it's called Dentaku, and this shows you how to use it. The only thing you have to notice that what you see on this page, wherever you see something like a name, you'd be using a colon before and after that to reference a field name in the meon context. But otherwise, it's kind of very similar to what this does. And you can, so this is in fact the most important part of it. So you have all these different operators available. You can use them, and there's many more actually which are not even listed here. I found when I played around. So but this gives you a starting point. So it has all these different operators that you can use. So that's about it for the expression field type. So let's go back. So just remember the name Dentaku. You can Google it. You'll find it. It's a gem. It's a library that you'll find on GitHub, and that's the help page for that. I can actually paste the link for you there so you can see it. So this is the link to that page. You can probably put it in the description later. So you can use that as a reference. I'll probably have a better documentation around this elsewhere. I have a few documents which explain a little more in detail, but that is a much larger source than what I have at this point. So that covers our tour of the different field types. So we've really covered everything it takes to build an app. So in this case, we just cloned an item, but if we go back up to the app, we could add another item. I'm sorry, we are in the kitchen sink app where I put all this fictitious text, but I could add another item, or when I'm in the post item, by clicking on this, I go to the post item, I could add a new child item, and there I could either clone an existing one, or I could type it out, and I could go in and set the sorting, the policy, the anonymity features, the recursion, the time window, the review features, and then I could add fields into it. So let's go and just look at the fields once again to wrap up. So I could add fields which would show up here, and I can click on any field and see its settings. Uh, so they show up under the item. So you have to go to the item page to see the fields. There's nothing, you can't jump to the fields from the app page. There's really no way to do that. And I'm trying to keep it like one level deep at any point rather than having too much clutter on each page. So, and then the best way to see the different types of fields is to go in here, new field, and click on any one of these to add a new field. And you don't have to really add it. You can look at it and you can see what all it does. And if it suits your needs, you can use it, or you can just cancel out, come back, create another field, and so on. All right. So, and then finally, you can, of course, once you've done all this, you can create a new post. All right. So that was a huge deal, but congratulations, you've really gone through the detailed overview of what Meon provides. I mean, it's all in there. Now it's up to you to think of new apps that you want to have, new experiences that you want to have, and see how you translate that into apps in Meon. So when we say that Meon enables any web experience, we mean any experience of the nature of apps that you've seen here, and that's a pretty large variety of apps that you can create, which you've already seen the around 80 or 90 apps that are there, and you can see how easy it is to create these. Once you start creating them, it'll be pretty the first one might take you a little while to figure out, but once you created one or two of them, you have all the information needed to create totally amazing apps. Now, one last point here, now that you have this information fresh in your mind, I think it's useful to note that we kind of go back and revisit some of this. So in the home page, I just went clicked on home, and I'm back on the home page. Here is write content. So now many of these things you write here could be in your own apps, or you could create when you click here and go to the full page, some of them could be in apps that others created where they gave you privileges. They might have added you as a user to instance creation, or they are under instance creators, or they could have added a group in which you're a member under instance creators, or they could have made it like open that any member can add instances. So, or it could be your own app, right? So all these scenarios will allow you to write content into apps. So what you see here is a mixture of all of those. It's not specific to any one. So one way to go and write is to directly go through this write content on the home page and come to this place and find something interesting to do and see which, you can always see which app you're writing to. So it says, admin's app and so on. So once you see that, you can directly start posting, or the other way is to go and explore some particular app that you know of, or a user. By clicking on the user, you can go to that. So this is going to show my page when I click on my username up here on top, and here I can see my content, my apps, and the groups that I belong to. And here's the whole groups notion. I don't think I can see these groups, but if I created a group, then you can also go into the groups and say add group. So if I had a group of my own, it would show down here and say my groups, and in that I would have a way to go to that group and I can add members to the group. So right now, the only way that members get added are people I know and I want to add them and I want to give them the privileges, but there's no way for someone to come and add themselves to my group. But if someone gets added, they can always leave the group by clicking leave group in their page here. Like for example, if I didn't want to be a member of admin's team group, I can always click on this and leave the group. All right. So that's a little bit about groups. So, but what I was coming at is also that you can look at any apps here of a given user and say, hey, I want to contribute to that particular app. So that's one way. Or you could go and search in apps and search, or you can search by user, and you can, there's several ways to get to different points. That's my point. But I think with the context that you have from this video, you can probably, you'll be much more informed on how you navigate things when it comes to writing content or finding content, reading it, finding apps, categories, and so on. You have a lot more information now to be able to make more informed choices. All right, that's it for this video. Thank you very much for listening. I think this is the most advanced video that I've created, and I think this will remain one of the most advanced videos that I'll create. And I think anyone who wants to understand Meon and start getting very, very creative with creating apps and playing around with apps will find this video to be extremely important and useful, and it's worth watching for them. And I also wanted to mention that once you clone an app, you can have already seen in this video, and you can kind of think of how you can change the settings on the items or add new fields, remove the fields, change the fields. You can do all of that with the information that you learned in this video. All right, thank you very much and enjoy the experience of Meon. Bye.